My mom accidentally ruined my gender reveal party, then said, "You can always have another baby." But the thing was, this wasn't the first accident involving her. She accidentally announced my pregnancy at Christmas, accidentally posted the ultrasound photos on Facebook. So at our gender reveal party, we made her promise there would be no accidents. My husband and I had called everyone to watch us drop the pink or blue bath bombs into the glass tub filled with water. But just as we started counting down, my mother stepped forward, leaning over the tub to get a better angle, and accidentally knocked the bath bombs out of my husband's hands. The water turned pink instantly, and before anyone could even celebrate, she started screaming, "It's a girl! It's a girl!" She turned from the tub and hugged my husband, while I stood there holding my unused bath bombs. I was furious and crying and yelled at my mom to get out. However, my family instantly jumped in to defend her. "Your mother's just enthusiastic," my father said. I borrowed a microphone that was being used for karaoke and turned to my mom. "Apologize," I demanded through tears, ignoring my dad. My mom rolled her eyes at me. "I already said I was sorry. Now you're making things awkward. Look at how uncomfortable everyone looks," she said, as if she was actually concerned about others. I tried explaining that we only got one gender reveal. We'd never get that moment back, but she held her hand to my face and cut me off. "Fine. I'm sorry. It was an accident. I'm just excited about my first granddaughter while you're being a huge party pooper." But before I could open my mouth to retaliate, my sister walked over with a smirk. "She raised you. You should honestly be grateful." I walked away after that. I'd gotten my apology and decided to be the bigger person, but I shouldn't have been so nice. The next day, I found out that my mom had self-appointed herself as co-host to our upcoming baby shower without telling me. She'd changed up a lot of the details to the party, from pink to purple, from cupcakes to donuts. She made sure it was the party she always wanted. And as if things couldn't get any worse, my mother showed up to the baby shower venue wearing the exact same dress I had picked out. "Oh, I thought everyone would be wearing this." "My bad," she giggled. But that was a blatant lie. She'd called my husband to ask what I'd be wearing, pretending she wanted to coordinate but not match. But that wasn't even what made me upset. During the party, she stood up to give a speech nobody asked for. "Thank you all so much for going to this party. It means so much to me that you're just as excited to meet baby Charlotte like I am," she announced to everyone. The room went silent. We hadn't told anyone the name. We hadn't even finalized it ourselves. It was written in our private baby journal that we kept in our bedroom nightstand, which meant only one thing. She'd gone through our bedroom during one of her visits and rummaged through our belongings. Without permission, I stood up slowly. "You're not invited to the delivery room." Everyone held their breath as her face went red. "You can't keep me from my granddaughter's birth," she gasped. "Watch me." Half the family stormed out with her. The other half stayed but looked uncomfortable. That night, she posted on Facebook about being alienated from her grandbaby by an ungrateful daughter. The next few days were quiet, except for the passive-aggressive messages and posts made on social media. But the week before my scheduled labor date, something unspeakable happened. I was taking a nap in the living room when I heard the door suddenly swing open. In the doorway was my mother, holding a key to our house. "There you are. I'm here to apologize, so let me see the birth of my granddaughter, okay?" she asked casually. My blood went cold as I stared at the key in her hand. Forget the birth situation. This was actual breaking and entering. This wasn't normal anymore. This was obsessive. I called my husband over and asked him to escort my mother out and confiscate the keys. Once she was gone, I looked at my husband. "We need to change the locks." "My mother, she's out of control," I told him, shaking. Just as I feared, my mother returned to our house that night, but this time with a vengeance. "If I can't see my granddaughter, nobody can," she threatened. I stood there frozen, staring at the key in her hand, her words about not letting anyone see my baby playing over and over in my head. My husband moved fast, stepping between us and putting his hand up. He told her she needed to leave right now and that what she just said was completely out of line. She started to argue, but he was already guiding her toward the door, his voice firm in a way I'd never heard before. I couldn't move, couldn't think straight, just watched as he walked her outside toward her car. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely hold my phone. I kept thinking about what she meant by that threat, about whether she would actually try to hurt me or the baby or do something crazy. Through the window, I could see her yelling at him in the driveway, waving her arms around. But he just held out his hand until she dropped the key into it. She got in her car and drove off, and I finally let myself breathe. My husband came back inside and locked the door behind him, then went through every room checking windows. I was already scrolling through my phone trying to find a locksmith, my fingers fumbling over the screen. I found one that did emergency calls and managed to schedule them for 8 the next morning, which felt like forever away. My husband asked if I was okay, and I just shook my head because I wasn't, not even close. After I hung up with the locksmith, I knew I needed to call someone official, someone who could tell me what my options were. I dialed the non-emergency police line and explained the whole situation to the woman who answered. She listened and then connected me to an officer named Brandon Banks, who asked me to start from the beginning. I told him about the gender reveal, the baby shower, finding out she'd gone through our stuff, the key, and especially the threat she'd just made. He didn't sound surprised or like he thought I was overreacting, which made me feel better. He explained that I should start keeping a detailed log of everything she does, with dates and times and exact words if I could remember them. He said to write down who witnessed each thing and to save any texts or social media posts she makes. He told me if her behavior kept getting worse, I might want to consider a temporary restraining order, and he gave me his direct number in case anything else happened. I wrote it all down on a piece of paper with my hand still shaking. My husband wanted to call his parents right away and tell them what happened, but I wasn't sure if we should tell everyone yet or wait until we had the locks changed. We ended up having a pretty big argument about it, with him saying we needed to get ahead of whatever story my mother was going to tell, and me worrying that telling people would just make everything blow up bigger. He pointed out that my mother was probably already on the phone spinning some version where she was the victim, and if we waited too long, everyone would believe her first. I hated that he was right, but he was. We finally agreed that we'd send one message to the whole family at the same time, just the facts, so nobody could say we were hiding anything or being dramatic. We decided to wait until later that night so we'd have time to figure out exactly what to say. At 11 that night, I typed out a message to the family group chat explaining that my mother had used a key we didn't know she had to enter our house without permission, and that she'd made a threatening statement about our baby. I said she wasn't welcome at our home anymore until further notice and that we were taking steps to secure our house. I kept it short and factual. No emotions, just what happened. My husband was on his phone at the same time going through our smart home app, and he found that we'd given my mother access to the garage door opener months ago when she was helping with some deliveries. He removed her access and then checked every other entry point we could control through the app. We changed the code on the keypad by the side door and made sure all the app permissions were locked down tight. My phone started buzzing with responses almost immediately, but I turned it face down and didn't look. I tried to go to bed, but I couldn't stop hearing sounds. Every little creak of the house settling, every car driving past, every branch hitting the window made me think she was coming back. I kept imagining her trying her key in the lock and getting mad when it didn't work anymore, then trying to break a window or force a door. I ended up on the couch with every light in the living room on, pulling a blanket around myself even though I wasn't cold. My husband came out around 2 in the morning and found me there, and he didn't even try to convince me to go back to bed. He just started doing rounds through the house, checking every window lock and door lock over and over. I'd doze off for maybe 20 minutes and then jerk awake convinced I'd heard something. This went on until the sun started coming up, and I finally felt safe enough to close my eyes for more than a few minutes. The locksmith showed up right at 8 like he'd promised and got to work immediately. He changed the locks on both the front and back doors, and then my husband asked about extra security, so the guy installed these heavy deadbolt bars that you can slide across from the inside. He also put in window sensors that would send alerts to my phone if any window got opened. I watched him take the old locks off, and it felt like watching chains come off. Even though I was so tired, my whole body hurt. My back was killing me from the awful couch sleep, and I could barely stand up straight. But I didn't care because at least now my mother couldn't just walk in whenever she wanted. The locksmith tested everything twice and showed us how all the new locks worked, then handed us the only copies of the new keys. After he left, my husband and I just stood there looking at the new locks for a minute, both of us too tired to even talk. Around 10:30 that morning, Officer Banks called me back to check in and see how I was doing. I told him about the locksmith and the new security stuff, and he said that was smart. Then he walked me through what would happen if I decided to file for a temporary restraining order. He explained that I'd need to go to the courthouse and fill out paperwork describing the pattern of behavior and why I felt threatened. He said a judge would review it and decide whether to grant a temporary order, and then there would be a hearing later where both sides could present their case. He told me to keep saving every text message, every voicemail, every Facebook post, anything my mother sent or posted. He also suggested I talk to my neighbors and ask if they'd seen anything unusual around my house, like my mother's car driving by or her walking around the property. I wrote everything down even though my hand was cramping up from exhaustion. Right after I hung up with Officer Banks, I called the hospital where I was planning to deliver. I got transferred around a few times before I ended up talking to a nurse named Marta Chang in the labor and delivery unit. I explained the whole situation and asked what could be done to keep my mother from showing up when I was in labor. Marta didn't sound shocked at all, like she'd dealt with this kind of thing before. She told me she could set up a password system on my chart so that nobody could get any information about me without knowing the password, not even whether I was admitted. She said she'd add my mother's name to a specific no-visitor list, and that security would be notified. She explained that the labor and delivery unit stays locked, and you have to be buzzed in, and without the password, nobody was getting through those doors. I felt this huge wave of relief wash over me, because at least that was one thing I didn't have to worry about anymore. Marta gave me her direct extension and told me to call if I had any other concerns or needed to update the security plan. That afternoon, my father called and I almost didn't answer, but I figured I should hear what he had to say. He started off saying that my mother was really hurt and that I needed to understand she was just excited about her first grandchild. I told him that breaking into someone's house and threatening their baby wasn't about excitement. It was about control. He said I was overreacting because of hormones and that I'd understand when I calmed down. I felt my blood pressure spike, and I told him that this had nothing to do with hormones and everything to do with my mother crossing serious lines. He started in with his usual speech about how she's still my mother and family forgives family, and I just hung up on him. I couldn't listen to him make excuses for her anymore, not after everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. The next morning, I woke up on the couch with my neck hurting and my whole body stiff. I grabbed my phone, and the first thing I saw was a notification from Facebook. My sister had posted something at 2 in the morning that said, "It's sad when some people cut off family over simple misunderstandings instead of choosing forgiveness." I took a screenshot right away and saved it to a folder on my phone labeled Evidence with the date and timestamp showing. It felt kind of petty to be collecting screenshots like this, but Officer Banks had told me to document everything, so that's what I was doing. I added a note in my phone about who might have seen the post and when it was made. My husband came downstairs around 7 and found me still on the couch scrolling through my phone. He sat down next to me and I showed him my sister's post. He looked tired and angry at the same time. We talked for a while about how we needed to make sure my mother couldn't use him to get to me. He pulled out his phone right there and started blocking my mother on everything. First his phone number, then his email, then Facebook, Instagram, and even LinkedIn. I watched him do it and felt this wave of relief because it meant we were really doing this together. We made a promise to each other that neither of us would talk to my mother alone anymore. If she somehow got through to one of us, we'd tell the other person right away, and we'd only respond together if we responded at all. After he finished blocking everything, I felt like I needed to get organized. I grabbed a notebook from our desk drawer and sat down at the kitchen table. I started writing down everything I could remember about my mother's behavior over the past few months. The pregnancy announcement at Christmas, the ultrasound photos on Facebook, the gender reveal disaster, the baby shower takeover, the matching dress, the name announcement, going through our bedroom, the key incident, the thread about the baby. I wrote down exact quotes when I could remember them, and I listed who was there to witness each thing. It took me almost an hour to get it all down on paper. When I was done, I just sat there staring at all of it. Seeing everything written out like that made me realize how much I'd been making excuses for her. I'd been telling myself she was just excited, or that she didn't mean it, or that it wasn't that bad. But looking at the whole pattern together, it was actually really bad. It was a lot worse than I'd been letting myself admit. Around 10 that morning, our neighbor John stopped by. He was holding some mail that had been delivered to his house by mistake. I thanked him and was about to close the door when he said he wanted to mention something. He looked uncomfortable, but he told me he'd noticed my mother's car driving really slowly past our house around midnight 2 nights ago. My stomach just dropped. 2 nights ago was before she'd shown up with the key. That meant she'd been watching our house even earlier than I thought. I asked John if he was sure it was her car, and he said yes. He recognized it because she used to park in our driveway all the time when she visited. I thanked him for telling me and went back inside feeling sick. I told my husband what John had said, and we both just looked at each other. My husband didn't say anything for a minute. Then he went to his laptop and started looking up security cameras. By noon, he'd ordered a video doorbell camera with overnight shipping. When it arrived the next day, he installed it right away. It took him about an hour to get it mounted and connected to our phones. We tested it a bunch of times, walking up to the door and watching the notification pop up on our phones with the live video feed. I felt a little bit safer knowing we'd have video proof if my mother showed up again. The camera recorded everything and saved it to the cloud, so even if something happened to the camera itself, we'd still have the footage. That same afternoon, a huge flower arrangement showed up at our door. The delivery guy handed me this massive thing with pink roses and baby's breath and all kinds of fancy flowers. There was a card attached. I opened it and my hand started shaking when I read what it said. "See you in the delivery room. Can't wait to meet my granddaughter." I was so angry I could barely see straight. She was treating this whole thing like a joke, like I hadn't meant what I said. I took photos of the card and the flowers from multiple angles, making sure the card was clearly visible in the pictures. Then I called a local nursing home and asked if they accepted flower donations. They said yes, so I drove over there and dropped off the whole arrangement. I wasn't keeping anything from her in my house. The next morning, I had my first appointment with a therapist named Leah, who specialized in family boundary issues. My regular doctor had recommended her after I'd called crying about the whole situation. Leah's office was in a small building downtown, and when I walked in, she seemed really calm and normal. We talked for almost an hour about everything that had been happening. She didn't seem shocked at all by any of it. She said she'd worked with lots of families dealing with boundary violations, and that my mother's behavior was definitely concerning. She helped me start making a safety plan for different situations that might come up, like what to do if my mother showed up at the hospital, what to do if she tried to contact my husband's family, what to do if she posted something really bad on social media. Leah also taught me some breathing exercises for when I started feeling panicked. She said I needed to take care of myself and the baby, and that meant managing my stress level. I left her office feeling like at least someone understood what I was dealing with. 2 days later, I met with Officer Banks again at the police station. He'd asked me to come in so we could work on drafting a cease and desist message. We sat in a small meeting room and he pulled up a template on his computer. Together, we filled it in with specific details about my mother's behavior and clear statements about what she needed to stop doing. No contact with me, no coming to my home, No attempting to visit me at the hospital. No posting about me or my baby on social media. Officer Banks said we weren't going to send it just yet. He wanted me to have it ready in case I needed to file for a restraining order later. If I did need to file, it would help my case to show that I'd tried other steps first. He saved the document and emailed me a copy. That afternoon, I called the hospital where I was planning to deliver. I asked to speak with the labor and delivery unit and got transferred to Nurse Marta again. This was my pre-admission appointment where we went over all the medical stuff, but I also wanted to finalize the security plan. Marta and I set up a code word that I would use when I arrived in labor. The code word was butterfly, because it was random and my mother would never guess it. Marta explained again that their security team dealt with difficult family situations all the time. She promised me that without my code word and explicit permission, nobody was getting past those locked doors, not even if they claimed to be family, not even if they caused a scene. She gave me her direct number again and told me to call if anything changed or if I had new concerns. I was just starting to feel like maybe I had things under control when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but I thought maybe it was something important, like the hospital calling from a different line or the police with an update. I answered and immediately heard my sister's voice. She didn't even say hello. She just launched right into it. She said I was destroying the family. She said I was breaking Mom's heart. She said I was being selfish and cruel, and that I was going to regret this. She kept talking, and I could feel my blood pressure going up. My face got hot and my heart started pounding. I tried to say something, but she just kept going. Finally, I hung up on her right in the middle of a sentence. I sat there holding my phone and shaking. My husband came over and asked what was wrong. I told him my sister had called and he looked so angry. He took my phone and blocked that number too. Then he made me sit down and do the breathing exercises Leah had taught me until my heart rate came back down. That night I couldn't sleep, so I sat at the kitchen table with my phone and started making a list. I created a new document and titled it Emergency Contacts. I typed in Officer Banks's direct number at the top, then added the hospital security line that Marta had given me. I scrolled through my contacts and found our lawyer friend's number and added that too. John's number went in next because he'd been watching out for us. I organized it by situation, like if my mother showed up at the house, call John first to see if he saw anything, then call the police. If something happened at the hospital, call Marta and security. If we needed legal advice, call the lawyer. Just having it written out made me feel like I had some control over what might happen. The next morning, my husband came downstairs looking upset and holding his phone. He showed me an email that had come to his work address overnight. It was from my mother. The subject line said, "Important information about your wife," and when I opened it, my hands started shaking. She'd written this long message about how I was clearly having a mental breakdown from pregnancy hormones. She said my husband needed to protect our daughter from my unstable behavior. She claimed I was keeping the baby from family who loved her, and that isolation was a sign of postpartum psychosis, even though I hadn't even given birth yet. She ended it by saying she was available to help him get me the treatment I desperately needed. My husband looked embarrassed and told me he was worried his coworkers might have seen it in his inbox. He forwarded the email to me so I could save it. Then he sent a message to his HR department explaining the situation. He added my mother to his spam filter and blocked her email address. I saved the email in my evidence folder with a screenshot and the date. That evening, we sat down on the couch together, and my husband turned to face me. He took my hands and told me he was completely on my side, and nobody was going to make him doubt that. He said watching my mother's behavior get worse and worse had actually shown him that I'd been way too patient with her, not too harsh. He told me he was proud of me for protecting our family, and that he'd do whatever it took to keep us safe. I started crying because I'd been so scared that my mother's campaign might work, and he might start questioning whether I was overreacting. Hearing him say those things made me feel less alone. My next therapy appointment was 2 days later, and I brought all the new evidence with me. Leah looked through the work email and the screenshots from my sister's calls and posts. She helped me understand something I hadn't really thought about before. She said I was grieving the mother I wished I had, not the one I actually had. She explained that it was totally normal to feel sad about enforcing boundaries even when they were absolutely necessary for safety. She said the grief didn't mean I was making the wrong choice. It just meant I was human, and I'd hoped for something different. That made so much sense to me because I did feel sad sometimes, even though I knew I was doing the right thing. I wasn't sad about losing my actual mother's presence because that had always been stressful and controlling. I was sad about losing the idea of having a normal mom who respected me. Leah taught me that I could grieve that loss while still protecting myself and my baby. The morning after that therapy session, John knocked on our door looking really uncomfortable. My husband let him in and John pulled out his phone. He said he felt weird showing me this, but he thought I needed to know. He pulled up his security camera app and showed me footage from 3 nights ago. The timestamp said it was around 2 in the morning. In the video, I could see my mother walking slowly around our house. She went to different windows and looked in, cupping her hands around her face to see through the glass. She tried the side gate to our backyard, but it was locked. She walked around to the front and stood on the porch for a while just staring at our door. I felt sick watching it. This wasn't just showing up during the day or sending messages. This was sneaking around our house in the middle of the night looking in our windows. John said his camera had motion alerts and that's how he'd noticed it. He offered to send me the footage, and I immediately said yes. I saved it to my evidence folder and thanked him for telling me, even though it was awkward. After John left, my husband and I looked at each other and agreed we needed to go to the police station right away. No, we drove there that afternoon and asked for Officer Banks. He came out to meet us and took us to a small meeting room. We sat down and I showed him everything I'd collected. The emails, the texts, the Facebook posts, the sisters' calls, John's security footage showing my mother prowling around our house at night. Officer Banks was really kind but also professional. He didn't act shocked or like I was overreacting. He just carefully logged everything into their system. He made notes about the pattern of behavior and how it was getting worse. He specifically noted the neighbor's camera footage and the threatening statements my mother had made. He explained that all of this was going into an official report and that I could use it if I needed to file for a restraining order. He thanked us for documenting everything so thoroughly and said that kind of evidence made a huge difference in these cases. That evening, I was checking Facebook before bed and saw that my mother had made a new public post. My stomach dropped when I read it. She'd written the name of the specific hospital where I was planning to deliver. She said she'd be there no matter what anyone said, because nobody could keep a grandmother from meeting her grandbaby. She tagged several family members in the post. I immediately took a screenshot and then I called Marta in a panic. It was late, but she'd told me to call anytime if something came up. Marta answered and listened while I explained about the Facebook post. She told me not to worry and that we'd handle it. The next morning, Marta called me back and said she'd coordinated with hospital security. They were adding a special flag to my file in the system. The flag meant that if anyone called or showed up asking about me, the staff wouldn't even confirm I was a patient there. They'd just say they couldn't give out that information. Marta explained that they dealt with domestic situations and stalking cases pretty regularly, and they took patient safety really seriously. She said the security team was trained for this kind of thing, and they'd make sure my mother couldn't get past the locked doors of the labor and delivery unit. Knowing the hospital had a plan made me feel a little bit better. 2 days later, I got a text from my sister that I almost deleted without reading. But I opened it and saw that she'd sent me a formal invitation. It was for a family gathering at my parents' house next week. The invitation called it a family intervention to work through this misunderstanding. She said everyone would be there and we could all talk calmly and figure this out. Part of me felt this pull to go because I still wanted to fix things somehow. I wanted there to be a way to make this okay, but I knew better. I called my husband and read him the invitation. He said it sounded like a trap. I called Leah and she agreed completely. She said walking into a room full of people who'd already decided I was wrong would just give them a chance to gang up on me and pressure me. She reminded me that I'd already tried to set boundaries multiple times and my family had ignored them every single time. An intervention wasn't going to change that. I texted my sister back and declined the invitation. Then I took a screenshot of it and added it to my evidence folder as more proof of the pressure campaign. In my next therapy session with Leah, we worked on something practical. She said I needed a simple script I could use if any family members managed to get me on the phone or corner me somewhere. We came up with 2 sentences. I'm not discussing this. This conversation is over. That was it. Just those 2 sentences. Leah had me practice saying them over and over until I could get the words out without my voice shaking or apologizing after. She said the key was to not explain or justify or argue. Just state the boundary and end the conversation. We role-played different scenarios where family members might try to guilt me or argue with me. Each time I practiced saying my 2 sentences and then pretending to hang up or walk away. By the end of the session, I felt like I could actually do it if I had to. The next morning, I met Officer Banks at the courthouse and he walked me through every single form I needed to fill out for the temporary restraining order. My hands shook as I wrote down dates and descriptions of what my mother had done, and seeing it all on paper made it feel more real and more scary at the same time. Officer Banks was patient and helped me organize everything in the right order, explaining what the judge would want to see and how to describe the pattern of behavior. I had to include the gender reveal incident, the baby shower name announcement, the unauthorized key entry, the threat she made, and all the Facebook posts. After we finished the main paperwork, Officer Banks drove me to John's house so he could sign a notarized statement about what he'd witnessed. John had written down the dates and times he saw my mother's car driving past our house and the security footage of her trying to look in our windows. Having a neighbor willing to put his name on an official document meant everything, because it proved I wasn't making this up or being dramatic. We got John's statement notarized at the bank and added it to my file. Back at the courthouse, I had to use the bathroom, and that's when everything hit me all at once. I locked myself in a stall and cried so hard I thought I might throw up. This was my mother. I was filing legal papers to force my own mother to stay away from me. But I pulled myself together, washed my face, and went back out to submit all the forms to the clerk's office. The clerk reviewed everything and stamped it received, and Officer Banks told me I did a good job and that this was the right thing to do. That evening around 8 o'clock, 2 police officers knocked on our door, and I nearly had a heart attack thinking something terrible had happened. But they explained that someone had called in a welfare check claiming they were worried about a pregnant woman being held against her will at our address. The officers were really nice and apologetic when they realized it was a false report. They could see I was fine, that my husband wasn't holding me prisoner, and that our home was safe and normal. One of the officers told me they were going to note in their system that this appeared to be a malicious call, probably from my mother trying to cause problems. He said false welfare checks were actually a crime, and if it happened again, they'd investigate who made the call. After they left, I sat on the couch shaking because my mother had stooped to using emergency services to harass us. She was wasting police time and resources just to mess with me. Officer Banks called me first thing the next morning before I'd even finished my coffee. He'd already heard about the welfare check from the officers who responded, and he said this was the final straw. He told me I needed to get that restraining order filed immediately, because my mother's behavior was escalating in dangerous ways. We spent an hour on the phone while he helped me complete the affidavit that described the full pattern of behavior. He explained exactly what to expect at the hearing, how to present myself to the judge, and what kind of questions I might be asked. He said the false welfare check was actually helpful evidence because it showed my mother was willing to lie to authorities and weaponize emergency services. I felt sick knowing that my mother's actions were now involving police officers and court systems, but Officer Banks kept reminding me that I was doing everything right and protecting my family. I drove back to the courthouse that afternoon and handed my completed filing to the court clerk. She reviewed all the paperwork and the attached evidence, then told me she was accepting my filing and would set a hearing date. My stomach dropped when she said the hearing was scheduled for 5 days from now. That was cutting it really close to my due date, and I was anxious about the timing. But the clerk explained that because of the threatening behavior and the pregnancy, they were moving my case through the system as quickly as possible. She said the judge took these situations seriously and would review all my evidence before the hearing. I left the courthouse feeling both relieved that the legal system was taking this seriously and nervous that everything was happening so fast. When I got home, my husband showed me an email my mother had sent him with the subject line in all caps reading "Last Chance." I felt my blood pressure spike as I read her demanding that we apologize to her and let her back into our lives before the baby came. She wrote that this was our final opportunity to fix things and that she wouldn't be so forgiving if we waited any longer. My husband hadn't responded to the email and said he had no intention of ever responding. We saved the email and added it to our evidence file because it showed she was still trying to find ways around my boundaries and still acting like she was the victim. The fact that she sent it to my husband instead of me proved she was trying to manipulate him and drive a wedge between us. During my next therapy session, Leah gave me homework that felt overwhelming but necessary. She said I needed to create a media blackout plan for the week I went into labor, which meant deciding exactly who got told when, and making sure those people understood they couldn't post anything online. We spent the whole session narrowing down the list of people I could trust. I realized I couldn't tell my father because he'd tell my mother immediately. I couldn't tell most of my extended family because they'd been siding with my mother on social media. We ended up with just 3 people on the list: my husband's parents and my best friend from college. All 3 of them had proven they could keep information private and wouldn't post anything on Facebook or Instagram. Leah made me practice exactly what I'd say to each of them about why they couldn't share the news publicly. 2 days later, I came home from a doctor's appointment to find a wrapped gift sitting on our front porch. There was a card from my sister saying it was a present for the baby, and that she hoped I'd accept it even though we weren't talking. Part of me wanted to just throw it away, but I brought it inside and opened it. It was a really cute stuffed elephant, soft and perfect for a newborn. I was actually touched for about 5 seconds until I squeezed the elephant and felt something hard inside. I ripped open the seam and found an AirTag tracking device sewn into the stuffing. My hands started shaking so badly I dropped the elephant on the floor. Someone had deliberately hidden a tracking device in a baby gift. My sister or my mother or both of them together had planned this. They wanted to track where the baby went, or maybe they wanted to track when we left for the hospital. I couldn't think straight and I could barely breathe. My husband found me sitting on the floor staring at the AirTag, and he immediately took over. He called Officer Banks while I just sat there trying to process that my own family would do something this creepy. The next morning, we went to the police station and filed a supplemental report about the tracking device. Officer Banks took photos of the elephant, the torn seam, the AirTag, and the card from my sister. He added everything to the restraining order evidence file and said this was actually helpful for the court case, even though it was horrible for me to experience. He explained that this kind of thing showed a clear pattern of invasive and obsessive conduct that went way beyond normal family drama. The judge would see that my mother and sister were working together to stalk me and violate my privacy in increasingly serious ways. Officer Banks said the tracking device was proof they were planning something, maybe planning to follow us to the hospital or show up wherever we took the baby. I felt validated that he took it so seriously, but I also felt more scared than ever. That afternoon, my father called my husband's cell phone instead of mine. My husband put it on speaker so I could hear, and my father admitted that my mother had taken the house key from his keyring without asking him. He said he'd noticed it was missing a few days after the incident at our house and confronted my mother about it. She'd confessed to taking it but told him it was her right as a grandmother. My father sounded tired and sad as he explained this, and for a second I thought maybe he was finally going to help us. But then he said he couldn't give a formal statement to the police because he couldn't betray his wife like that. I felt betrayed all over again because he knew exactly what she'd done wrong, but he still wouldn't help stop it. He chose his loyalty to my mother over protecting his pregnant daughter and granddaughter. My husband thanked him for the information and hung up, and I cried because I'd lost both my parents in this mess. My husband spent that evening creating a very specific list of exactly 2 people who were allowed to know when I went into labor. Just his parents. That was it. We decided even my best friend would find out after the baby was born because we needed the tightest possible circle. The next day, we drove to the hospital for a final pre-admission tour, and we practiced the code word system with the labor and delivery staff. We met with Marta again, and she walked us through exactly what would happen when we arrived. We'd use the code word at check-in, and our names would be completely hidden from the system. We practiced saying the code word out loud so it wouldn't feel weird when the real moment came. Having everything planned out and tested like this made me feel more prepared and way less scared about the actual delivery day. I knew the hospital had our backs, and that my mother couldn't just walk in and ruin everything. We drove home that night, and I actually felt like maybe we could do this. Maybe we could have our baby safely without my mother destroying it. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I sat at the kitchen table around midnight with a notebook and started writing. I wrote about how much it hurt to lose my mother's place in my life, but how I couldn't keep accepting her behavior just because she was family. I wrote that I'd rather have safety and peace for my daughter than chaos and constant violations of our boundaries. Putting the words on paper helped me process the grief I was feeling, while also making me more sure that I was doing the right thing. I folded the letter and tucked it into my pregnancy journal so I could read it again if I started doubting myself. The next morning, my phone rang at 8:30, and it was the court clerk calling to tell me the temporary restraining order had been granted, based on all the evidence we submitted. She explained that the judge reviewed everything, including the tracking device, the unauthorized key, the threats, and the neighbor's camera footage. The order said my mother had to stay at least 100 yards away from me, our home, and the hospital where I planned to deliver. I felt this huge wave of relief wash over me because now there was legal protection in place. But the clerk also explained that the order couldn't actually take full effect until my mother was officially served with the papers by a process server. Until she received the documents in person, the restraining order existed but couldn't be enforced. The court had already sent a process server to my mother's house that morning to deliver the papers. I waited by my phone all day hoping to hear that it was done, but around 4 p.m. the process server called to say my mother wouldn't answer her door. He said her car was in the driveway, and he could hear movement inside the house, but she refused to come to the door. He left a notice on her door and said he would try again the next day, but it was really frustrating because it seemed like she was avoiding being served on purpose. I met with Nurse Marta the following afternoon for what she said would be our final appointment before my due date. We sat in a small office at the hospital, and she walked me through exactly what would happen if my mother or my sister tried to get into the labor and delivery unit. She showed me a map of the floor and pointed out where the locked doors were and where security would be stationed. She explained that when I arrived in labor, I would give the code word at check-in, and my name would be completely removed from any computer system that visitors could access. If anyone came asking about me, the staff would say they had no patient by that name. Marta assured me that security would be called right away if my mother showed up, and that I wouldn't have to do anything except focus on delivering my baby safely. Hearing her explain the whole system step by step made me feel so much more prepared and less scared about the actual delivery day. That evening around 7 p.m., I got a text from John with a photo attached. The picture showed my mother's car parked down the street from our house with the engine running and exhaust coming out of the tailpipe. My hands started shaking as I realized she was actively watching our house right now. I immediately called Officer Banks, and he said he would send a patrol car to document it and tell her to leave. About 20 minutes later, he called back and said the patrol officers had talked to my mother and she drove away, but now we had proof she was monitoring our house. The next morning, Officer Banks called with a new plan since my mother kept avoiding the process server at her house. He said he'd arranged for the server to meet my mother at her workplace the next day during her lunch break. It felt kind of aggressive to have her served at work in front of her coworkers, but I was running out of time before my due date. The restraining order couldn't take full effect until she actually received the papers, and I needed that protection in place before I went into labor. The following day around noon, I got a call from the process server confirming that my mother had been officially served with the restraining order papers at her job. Within an hour, she was posting angry rants on Facebook about being attacked by the system and persecuted for loving her grandchild. I took screenshots of everything she posted, but I tried not to read the comments from family members who were taking her side. Now the restraining order was fully active and enforceable, which meant if she came near me or the hospital, she could be arrested. I woke up 3 days later at 4 in the morning with strong contractions that were coming every 5 minutes. I shook my husband awake and we quietly gathered our hospital bags and headed out to the car. We didn't tell anyone we were going because our plan was to wait until after the baby was born to make any announcements. The drive to the hospital was quiet, except for me breathing through contractions and my husband holding my hand at red lights. Somehow my sister figured out we were at the hospital, maybe from seeing our car leave or tracking some other pattern we didn't notice. Around 8 a.m., she posted a vague status on Facebook asking if anyone knew what hospital in the area has the best labor and delivery unit. My husband saw the post, and we immediately turned off all our phones and handed them to the nurse so we wouldn't be tempted to check social media. Around noon, Nurse Marta came into my room looking calm but serious, and told me that hospital security had just stopped my mother at the locked entrance to the labor and delivery unit. My mother had tried to get in, but when security asked for the code word, she couldn't provide it, so they turned her away. Marta said security escorted her out of the building and told her she wasn't allowed to return. I felt scared knowing my mother had actually shown up and tried to get to me, but I also felt so relieved that the system worked exactly like they promised it would. About an hour later, Officer Banks showed up at the hospital, and I could hear his voice in the hallway talking to security before Marta brought him to my room. He explained that he'd issued my mother an official warning in writing that she violated the restraining order by coming to the hospital and trying to access the labor unit. He told me through the doorway that any more violations would result in immediate arrest, and that security had escorted her off the property with photos documenting the incident. I thanked him and he left quickly because I was having stronger contractions and needed to focus on the actual labor part. That evening around 7, I finally delivered my daughter with just my husband holding my hand in the room. Despite everything that had happened over the past few weeks with my mother and all the fear and planning, the actual birth itself felt peaceful in a way I hadn't expected. The room was quiet except for the medical equipment beeping and my husband whispering that I was doing great. When they placed my baby on my chest, I started crying, but not from pain or fear anymore. I cried because we'd actually made it here safely, and all the boundaries we'd put in place had protected this exact moment from being ruined or invaded. My husband was crying too, and we just sat there for a while holding our daughter and not saying anything, because words felt too small for what we were feeling. Around midnight, they moved us to a postpartum recovery room down a different hallway that was quieter and had a small couch where my husband could try to sleep. Nurse Marta came by to check on us and went over the privacy plan for when we'd be ready to leave in a day or two. She reminded me that the no visitor flag would stay on my chart the whole time we were there, and that we could leave through a private exit near the loading dock when we were discharged. She showed us on a little map where the exit was located and gave my husband a phone number to call 30 minutes before we wanted to leave, so security could make sure the path was clear. I felt so grateful that she was taking everything seriously and not acting like I was being dramatic or difficult. The next morning around 8, my phone buzzed with a text from my father that just said, "Congratulations, period. I'm sorry, period. Can I drop off a meal, question mark?" I stared at the message for a long time, trying to figure out if it was genuine or if my mother had put him up to it as a way to get information about where we were. I showed the text to my husband, and we talked quietly while the baby slept about whether responding would open a door we weren't ready to open yet. We finally decided that a brief thank you and a yes to the meal drop-off didn't mean we were letting him back into our lives or giving him access to our daughter. My husband texted back a simple thanks, and our address with instructions to leave the food on the porch. I spent some time that afternoon while my husband napped thinking about whether there might be any path forward with my mother that wouldn't put our safety at risk. I decided that maybe someday supervised contact could be possible if she actually got professional help and showed real change over time. But that was a conversation for the future, and not something I needed to solve right now while I was still in the hospital, learning how to nurse and change diapers and function on 2 hours of sleep. We brought our daughter home 2 days later in the early afternoon, and John was waiting outside on his porch when we pulled into the driveway. He came over right away to help carry our bags and told us he'd been keeping an eye on the house and hadn't seen my mother's car or anyone else suspicious. His kindness made me want to cry again because it reminded me that family isn't just about who you're related to by blood. Family is about who shows up and respects your boundaries and helps carry your bags when you're exhausted. A few days after getting home, I had a phone check-in with Leah scheduled for the afternoon when my husband could watch the baby. She asked me a bunch of questions about how I was sleeping and eating, and whether I was having scary thoughts or feeling hopeless. She explained that given everything I'd been through with my mother the past few months, I was at higher risk for postpartum anxiety and depression. She taught me some breathing techniques I could use when I felt panicked or overwhelmed, and reminded me that asking for help wasn't weakness. When my daughter was 2 weeks old, the restraining order hearing happened over video call from our living room. My husband held the baby while I sat on the couch with my laptop and watched the judge review all the evidence Officer Banks had submitted. The judge extended the restraining order for a full year and added conditions that included my mother attending counseling sessions with proof of attendance sent to the court. I felt this huge sense of relief knowing the legal protection was solid and documented, and that there would be consequences if she violated it again. That same evening, my husband and I worked together to write a careful email to the extended family explaining our position going forward. We said that any future contact with my mother would require proof she was actively in counseling, that visits would be supervised only, and that our boundaries were absolute and non-negotiable. We weren't completely cutting off the possibility of reconciliation someday, but we were making it clear that the terms would be ours to set, and not up for debate. A few days later, I got a message through the hospital's patient portal from Nurse Marta, checking in on how I was doing at home. She confirmed that my medical records were locked and flagged in their system, so my mother couldn't access any information about the birth or my recovery. She also sent me links to some postpartum support groups in the area, and reminded me I could always call the unit if I had concerns or questions about anything. A few days later, Officer Banks called my phone around lunchtime while I was folding tiny baby clothes on the couch. He told me my mother had enrolled in a court-mandated counseling program after the violation warning at the hospital, and that the court had received her first proof of attendance. I felt this weird mix of hope and fear hearing that because part of me wanted to believe she might actually change, But Officer Banks kept talking and reminded me that restraining orders exist for a reason, and I shouldn't let my guard down just because she was going through the motions of counseling. He said people can attend therapy and still not respect boundaries, so I needed to stay alert and keep documenting anything that felt off. I thanked him and hung up feeling like I'd been given permission to not forgive her right away, which was something I didn't realize I needed. That evening after my husband took over diaper duty, I went into the nursery and sat in the rocking chair holding my daughter while she slept against my chest. The room was quiet, except for her tiny breathing sounds and the hum of the white noise machine we kept running. I looked around at the changing table we'd set up, the crib with the mobile hanging above it, the bookshelf already filled with board books from friends who respected our boundaries. My home felt peaceful in a way it hadn't in months, maybe even years if I was being honest with myself. The locks were changed so my mother couldn't just walk in anymore. The boundaries were clear and backed up by legal documents that had real consequences attached. The people who had access to our lives now were people who actually respected us, instead of people who thought love meant ignoring what we asked for. I realized I was grieving the grandmother relationship I'd wanted my daughter to have, the kind where grandma comes over for Sunday dinners and teaches her to bake cookies and tells her stories. I was also grieving the mother-daughter relationship I wish I'd had, one where my mom celebrated my moments instead of stealing them and respected my privacy instead of going through my things. But sitting there in the dark nursery with my baby sleeping and my husband humming in the next room, I knew I'd made the right choice. My family was safe and our boundaries were enforced with actual legal backing instead of just my word against hers. I was building the kind of home where my daughter would grow up knowing that love includes respect, and that it's okay to protect yourself even from family. The circle was smaller now, but it was filled with people who truly cared about us as individuals, instead of treating us like props in their own story. And honestly, that was enough. That is how it went from my side. Now I am curious what you think because everyone always sees something different. Leave your thoughts in the comments and let's talk about it. I always end up learning from you.